Hi everyone, Nigel here, in desperate need of a haircut. This week's Tottenham Park Film Club at Home pick is Clint Eastwood's Oscar-winning western, Unforgiven. This was a major film for me as a teenager, and I think probably the first film that I ever went to see twice at the cinema. My dad absolutely loves westerns, and they were pretty much the only old movies that I watched growing up as a kid. So I was familiar with Clint Eastwood from a very young age, and in particular was a fan of the spaghetti westerns that he made with Sergio Leone, and also the outlaw Josie Wales, which I think is definitely up there with this film, Unforgiven. In fact, I love these films so much that not that long before Unforgiven came out in September 1992, I wrote my GCSE English project about Clint Eastwood's westerns, so I was ahead of the curve on that one. If you're familiar with Eastwood's earlier films or other classic westerns, you can definitely see Unforgiven in the context of those. He dedicates the film to two mentors, Sergio Leone, who made him a movie star with the Dollars films in the 60s, and Don Siegel, who made The Beguiled, Dirty Harry and three other films with Eastwood, and was a big influence on Clint as he became a director himself. There are nods to other westerns too. The children of Eastwood's character are called Will and Penny, after the title of a Charlton Heston western. And the film definitely has its fair share of western movie tropes. It's a hired gun story, there's a young wannabe hoping to make a name for himself, there's a showdown, and so on. But I think the reason why it resonates, and also, to be fair, I think appeals to people who think they don't like westerns, is it's a far more ambiguous film than the stereotypical white hat versus black hat cowboy movie you might be expecting. The script is by David Webb Peoples, who co-wrote Blade Runner, another story riddled with ambiguity. It was written in the late 70s and inspired both by Glendon Swarthout's novel The Shootist, which was adapted later as John Wayne's final film, and Taxi Driver, which people said changed his perspective of what you could show in terms of violence while still presenting characters behaving in a realistic way. Eastwood didn't own the script until the mid-80s. Prior to that, Francis Ford Coppola had optioned it, but Clint decided to wait until he felt suitably aged to play the lead, William Money. When he was doing press for Unforgiven, Eastwood said it would be his final western, and so far he's been good to his word on that. In a subsequent interview, he said, "It was everything I wanted to say in a western, but was never able to, because people just take the obvious route and go for the formula." One of the ways the film doesn't feel formulaic is that each of these characters have a distinct story arcs that aren't always predictable. None of the characters you see on the poster here are kind of rigidly good or bad, though I don't think any of them really think they're going to end up anywhere else but hell. They each relate to the film's overarching themes about violence in different ways. Richard Harris, as the gunman English Bob, has a memorable speech about why a monarch would never be assassinated, while an American president, on the other hand, well, I mean, why not shoot a president? Morgan Freeman, who plays Ned, has talked about his character in relation to the 1991 Rodney King beatings in Los Angeles, and Eastwood encouraged Gene Hackman to take inspiration from the then long-standing LA Chief of Police, Daryl Gates, for his portrayal of the sheriff, Little Bill Daggett. Hackman deservedly won the Best Supporting Actor Oscar. He's kind of like an Old West Judge Dredd, doling out law and order with a slightly fascist streak, while seeing himself as a pillar of the society whose main priority is building himself a nice house. Kind of going back to the point that the film is far from being formulaic, it's also one where women play a much more active part in the narrative than in many other westerns. The whole story is kicked off by an act of violence against a woman, and the sense that the punishment was not consummate to the crime. Throughout the film, women are very present, both physically in the town of Big Whiskey and, in Money's case, in the memories of his wife. The other big themes of the movie are stories about myth-making, and all of the characters kind of have a past, but through the great character of the dime novelist Beauchamp, played by Saul Rubinek, we also see how the legends of the Wild West originated. One of my favourite moments in the film is where Little Bill takes the piss out of English Bob by calling him the Duck of Death instead of his preferred moniker, and the one that Beauchamp is helping him burnish, the Duke of Death. There's actually quite a lot of humour in the film, often at Eastwood's expense, as he undercuts his image by struggling to get on a horse, or in another great exchange with Morgan Freeman's character Ned, kind of challenges his virility. A couple of other credits worth noting are cinematographer Jack Green, who won the Oscar, and production designer Henry Bumstead, both of whom are regular Eastwood collaborators. Eastwood's prevailing reputation as a filmmaker is kind of unfussy efficiency rather than visual flair, but there are some really beautiful shots in Unforgiven, both of the landscape and also in the darkness of both the interior and exterior scenes. The set also feels real, partly because Bumstead built full buildings where they could shoot interiors and exteriors. And Big Whiskey doesn't quite look like other Western movie towns because it kind of seems to have been built on a slope, so you don't have that classic High Noon style Main Street. The film was a big critical hit and was nominated for 9 Oscars and won 4, including Best Picture and Best Director. Clint Eastwood had been one of Hollywood's kind of biggest box office draws as an actor for decades, but it was Unforgiven that gave him an air of respectability as a filmmaker, at least on home soil. In his Oscar acceptance speech, he thanked the French critics who embraced some of my work very early in the game, the British Film Institute, and some of the people who were there long before I became fashionable. It's a film I think has aged very well. Its themes certainly still resonate, and you can see its influences both in terms of look and language in kind of like the relatively few westerns that have followed it, most notably Deadwood. If you do enjoy this film and want to see something a little different, a few years ago, a Japanese remake, also called Unforgiven, came out, starring Ken Watanabe. I watched it recently and liked it a lot. It's also set in 1880, but in Hokkaido in northern Japan. It's both kind of very similar and sufficiently distinct, given the cultural and geographic differences. It also feels like a fitting gesture, given A Fistful of Dollars was a wholesale rip-off of Akira Kurosawa's Yojimbo. Okay, that's it. As always, there are links on our website to the various platforms where you can stream Unforgiven. If you watch either this film, the original, or the remake, do please send us any feedback. Stay safe, video well.